And good afternoon, and welcome to my session, The Joy of Multiple Models here at the JDK IO in Copenhagen. And after lunch, I want to do a little exercise with you, so please everybody stand up. And since we're a small audience, it would be great if the people from in the back would come here to the front. So please, then I don't have to scream so much. So go like this, and then come to the front and sit here. Yeah, great. Thank you. And then, yeah, take a seat again, please. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Great. Okay. Yeah, as you heard, I'm obviously not David, and I'm sorry. I cannot be here tomorrow, he cannot be here today, and there was a planning mistake, so that's why we switched sessions. So it's basically not as you said, I was so kind, but it's my fault that it was switched, to be honest. Okay, so we're not talking about Java EE, but we're talking about domain-driven design. And yeah, as you heard, my name is Henning Schwentner, and you can find me, of course, in the net as Schwentner. That's a hard one. And yeah, of course, not only on Twitter, but on GitHub, Instagram, and for the younger colleagues, Snapchat. I don't know if that's important here. More important here is maybe this social network, Speaker Deck. There you can find the slides afterwards, or you can find them even now. And as you can see, there are a lot of them, so maybe you want to look at them again. Also, H. Schwentner, my initials there. Okay, what's my background? I've studied computer science at the University of Hamburg. I like good food, yoga, and good football. So I'm looking forward to the World Cup starting on Thursday. And I'm a proud dad, but here I'm, of course, to talk about work. And what's about on work? There I'm a coder, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, and I'm a consultant. So coder, coach, consultant. And typically, I'm programming in Java, but to be honest, also a lot in C#. And I spent quite some time with SAP, programming ABAP. That's the special SAP language. So you can make more money there. Okay, I work at a company in Hamburg that's called WPS, Workplace Solutions. That's Whiskey Papa Sierra. Whiskey Papa Sierra, WPS. And we are a consultant and development company. And what you may have heard of are these touch tables we are making apps for. Okay, and I want to start with a little story I would like you to tell. And the story is about Bob. Bob wants to have a new car, but when he looks into his purse, he sees, oh, there's not much in it. How can I afford a car? What can I do? So, do I get a car for this? I think not. But you're supposed to laugh now. Okay. But he goes to his car dealer anyway, and the car dealer says, well, you don't have money now, but we will find a solution. And this solution is called leasing. What's leasing? Yeah, that means we give you a new car now, and you don't give us money now, but you will pay us a monthly rate, a so-called installment. And so everybody's happy. You get a car, and we get our money anyway. Okay, so let's look more closely at this. Sorry. Let's look more closely at this. How is this working? So we have this customer, Bob, and he has a wish. And he tells this wish to a salesperson. And the salesperson then calculates the installment. That's the monthly payment for the customer. And then the customer signs the contract, gives it back to the salesperson, and then, that's the interesting part, The customer doesn't get directly his car, but the salesperson passes on the contract to a colleague, to a so-called risk manager. And the risk manager then checks the credit rating of the customer, and he checks what would be the resale value of the car. So if the customer up here couldn't pay his installments anymore, then we could, as a leasing, always resale the car. So then we get back our money as well, if the resale value is high enough. So the risk manager looks into, is the risk big or is the risk small? And if the risk is small enough, then he says, okay, let's do this contract. He makes a so-called vote. He's voting the contract. And if the vote is yes, we will do that, then the salesperson gives the car to the customer. Okay, and that's the start of our process. And of course, there's a lot of other things happening afterwards, but for what we are looking into, this is enough. And what you can see here, that's the so-called domain story. Domain storytelling is a method to draw stories, so to listen to stories from the domain, from your users, and then draw them so you can show the users, did I understand it correctly? Okay, so but what's for us now interesting from this domain story, from this domain, is how do we design a program for that? So what do we do with this domain knowledge we gained now? Yeah, enter domain-driven design, or DDD for short, and DDD tells us good idea is to build the software in a way that it grows out of your domain. So it has to plant its roots into the domain. It's not spinning around somewhere in space, but it comes directly from the domain. And how do we do it? We do it by making the software a reflection of the domain. So that means we look at the domain, we look at the things we see there, the structures we see there, and the actions, the activities that are done there, and we take them into our software, into the user interface, and also into the architecture, into the code. So, for example, we look at the work items we find there, and then we make classes out of these work items. So what we're doing is building a model. We take things from the real world and implement them as a model. Okay, when we look at our domain story again, or parts of our domain story, then we can see an important work item that we have when we're doing leasing is, of course, the contract. So we want to have a class, let's call it contract, or leasing contract. And then we can see things that are done with this contract, activities that are done with this contract. So a contract is signed, contract is voted by the risk manager. So we want to have methods sign and vote. And this way we get a domain model with rich domain behavior. Okay, and when we go on, of course there are a lot of other things we do with the leasing contract, and there will enter more and more methods. So we want to extend a contract when it's at its end, or we want to terminate a contract, the customer isn't paying anymore, or we want to sell this leasing contract to a refinancer. And of course there's a lot of more things we want to do with a leasing contract. And as we can see, this class leasing contract is starting to grow and grow and grow. It's getting bigger and bigger. And of course that may be a problem somewhere. Okay. But starting, we have one big model, we think, and maybe that's a good thing because that's the part to go. We have this one model, this one thing where we do everything right once and for all time. And later we always know when we want to do something with a leasing contract, we always go to this class leasing contract. Yeah, that's a nice wish, but beware, I have to tell you a sad truth, and that sad truth is this is not really one big model, but this is several models, several mental models of different developers mixed up into one piece of code. So there's not one developer who understands everything of this, voting and signing and extending the contract and all the other stuff. And that's a problem because we work together. We all work together on this thing. Okay, this one works only in Germany. So why is that? Why don't we really have one big model? Why do we have several models? That's because our domain and our model 2 are complicated, complex as well. So to put this complicated domain into our brain, that's hard. We cannot wrap our head around the whole model, around the whole domain. So the model is too big to be understood as a whole. And all sorts of problems come with that. For example, we have these whack-a-mole issues. When we have this big model, this big class for leasing contract, then we make a change to it, but we're not sure what's happening. So we make a change down here, we turn something down here, and then up here, there's an error. And then we fix this change, and there's the error here again. So that's what this whack-a-mole metaphor means. So we have this hammer and want to push all the molds down, but the mole comes everywhere up at another place. And of course, every software system that has a certain size gets these problems. Who has had these problems? Okay. And the other ones are too tired after lunch to raise their arms, right? Okay, so that's one problem, whack-a-mole issues. And another problem is that it's hard with one big model to work with different teams on this. So this is from Wilhelm Busch. And different teams, 4 teams here, are working on one big model, but they're drawing each other, and you can't do anything without communicating with all the other teams, and you can't be fast, you can't be independent, and that's not nice. And in the end, yeah, well, this is going to happen. You're strangling yourself. We don't want to do that, of course. Okay, so now I've talked a lot about a model or about models. Let's look more closely at this. What actually is a model in this sense? So if you ask me, my definition is a model in this sense as a tool to understand the world. Okay, what does that mean? How do we understand the world? How do humans understand the world? So this is the world, and we want to put it into our brain. That's understanding, right? So if we look at this, well, the world is big and our brain is small compared to this. So it's hard. We cannot put the whole world into our brain. Not possible. But anyway, we can understand the world. We understand the world, don't we? And that's why Mother Nature or God or whoever gave us the possibility of abstraction. So we can abstract. We can leave the inessential out and only take the essential. We look at the essential and take that and leave everything else out. And this essential we can understand, and the rest we don't care about. Another word for this abstraction is model building. What we build is a model. A model is a smaller reflection of the real world where we only put the essential things in, and the inessential we leave out. Okay, so now we are at the point, this is inessential. Sorry. Okay, we only take the essential parts into our model. The important question is now, of course, what is the essential? And as I told you, I'm a consultant, so you know what my answer is to every question? It depends. Very good. You're a consultant too. Any more consultants here? Yeah, of course. Great. Okay, and it depends on what? That's the next question we ask. And it depends on the context. In different contexts, different things are essential. And that's interesting. So we can't look at the world and say, this is the essential thing of the world. No, we have to look at the context we're in. And in different contexts, different things are important. So what does that mean for our models when we want to have only the essential things in the model? That means we don't want to have just one model, but we want to have several models. For different contexts, we want to have different models. So what does that mean for the world? One model for the world, you can see up here, that's a globe. What's essential in this model or in this context is that the world is turning. We put that into the model of the globe. But that the world has also a core of magma, we don't have in the model. The globe is empty inside. We don't care about the core in this model. And we have other models of the world, of the Earth as well. So we can see this map here. So we can see that the world is turning. That's not important for this model. But we can see the continents and what they are named and their relationship to each other. And there are other kind of maps. And then we have this atlas here. That's really not one model, but a collection of models. Every page in this atlas is another model. So we have 10 pages of Africa, and every page is a different model. One page with Africa physical, where we can see the rivers and the mountains, and another model that's Africa politically, where we can see the borders and the capital cities. And one model, one page with natural resources, and so on and so on. A lot of different models. And why don't we have just one map of Africa? Because that would be too big. There would be too much detail in it. And we don't want to have so much detail. We want to have different models so we can use in different contexts the exact model that's right for our purpose in that context. And what DDD is telling us, let's do the same thing with our models, with our domain models. Let's take the domain and not build just one big model, but build several models. Not one big leasing contract class, but several classes for leasing contracts. In this small example, one contract which can be signed, one contract which can be voted. So now we have two classes that have the same name. That's, if you had never thought about that before, that's against everything I learned before. This does not conform with dry. Don't repeat yourself. Yeah, you're right, it doesn't. We want to have different models, not just one model. So we take the same thing from reality and build not one model, one class, but we build several models. One class leasing contract with a method sign, one class leasing contract with a method vote. And what we want to do is draw clear boundaries around them. So I said a model is always valid in a context, because the context defines us what's important and what's not important, what's essential and what's not essential. And that's what we're doing with these contexts here. So the upper class is in a context that's called sales, so this. And the lower class is in a context that's called risk management. We have two contexts. And again, this is domain driven, like the domain model comes from the domain. Also, these bounded contexts come from the domain. Sales and risk management are different activities in the domain, are different subdomains, as we call them. Okay. DDD calls these contexts bounded contexts, because we have these clear boundaries around them. That's what we want to have. We want to separate the models clearly from each other. Okay, these are our bounded contexts here. Sales and risk management. Okay, and when we look at our domain and we make the strategic design, then we divide up our whole domain into separate parts, into several subdomains, into several bounded contexts. And each bounded context has its own domain, its own model, sorry. Okay. I said we want to have clear boundaries. What does that mean? So is it like this? Yeah, we want to have clear boundaries, but not to separate people, but to separate models. And that is done on different levels. So it's done on a code level. As we could see, we have different classes that are separated. There's no relationship between them, nor you can compile the one class without having the other, and the other way around. And we want different teams to have different models. So the teams can work more or less independently from each other, only via an interface that we define between the bounded contexts and the teams. And of course, we want it in the database as well. So every bounded context has its own, at least database schema, maybe its own database. Every bounded context, every model, every domain model gets its own data model. Okay. So we call this, or DDD calls this a strategic design. Compared to a tactical design, that's DDD in the small. We're here talking about DDD in the large, strategic design, so Gesundheit. We take the domain as a whole and we cut it into pieces, into bounded contexts. And we do this, because we don't want to have the one big model that nobody can understand. The one big model that turns into the big ball of mud, where your code looks like this. Everything is connected to everything. Or when you look at it with analyzing tools, then you get something like this. So the colorful parts, those are classes, and the black lines, those are connections between these classes. And the more things you enter, the more gets connected to everything else. And in the middle, you can't even see that there are lines. It's one big black hole. And black hole, that's a good metaphor, because this big ball of mud, gets a lot of gravity. Everything new you put into it will also be drawn inside. And everything will get sticky and will put together. So we don't want to do that. We want to cut our domain. And when we think about this cow that is cut into pieces, well, I'm not so sure if this is a good picture. So when we have a herd of cows and we have to divide them up in any way, is this the right way? Do we want to cut the cows into pieces? Then we would get teams like this. A team for the heads, and a team for the bodies, and a team for the legs, and so on. The good thing about this kind of cutting is the experts are together. We have all the head experts together, and they know what they're doing. But the bad thing about this kind of dividing up our domain is that the herd as a whole can only live if every team is there. So that is why we say in DDD, we don't want to have this horizontal cut. We want to have a vertical cut. We want to have units that can live by themselves. So we divide up the herd cow for cow. Every cow can live for itself, and the herd can live even if one of the cows is not there. And that's what we want to have with our bounded context as well. Okay, that's what we can do with this. So the leasing contract on the left, from the sales context, that can be signed. independently from if there's a risk management or not. And the other way around as well. Okay. That was the theory, but how do we implement this in Java? So we want to have different models, but how do we implement different models or different bounded contexts in Java? We can do packages, or if we're lucky and on a newer version of Java, we can use the Jigsaw-Modules. And well, I don't know if there are .NET people here. There you can use DLLs. Or generally, microservices or self-contained systems, that's also a possibility to implement bounded contexts, to draw these context boundaries. How do we do that? I think we have enough time to look at this more deeply. And let's start with multiple models in Java, since this is a Java conference. So how do we do that? Since the beginning of Java, we have had classes, and for bigger things than classes, we had packages. Okay, so what we can try is use these packages as bounded context. So we can do something like this. We can have a package called sales with a class leasing contract, and we can have a package risk management with another class also called leasing contract. And since these classes are in different packages, that's okay. There's no name clash or anything. So that's working. We have something like this. Package sales and a package risk management and different implementations. But as you probably know, there are some problems with packages. We don't have real encapsulation. We don't have nesting. So when we nest packages, that's not really a nesting for the compiler, it's only a nesting for us in our head if we use the dot schema. So in a way, packages are only a logical group of classes. And yeah, we have this thing, public versus package private, so that's a bit of a capsule. So the public classes are the interface to the package, and the package private are package private, but with reflection you can go through everything. And since we don't have nesting in the real world, most projects don't use package private because we want to have a more detailed view of packages. Okay, but it's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. When we put all classes of one bounded context in one package, that's already quite okay. But of course, now we have Project Jigsaw. We have fully fledged modules in Java since JDK 9. And there we have a real capsule. So we can define a real interface and say, this is interface, this is implementation, and nobody from the outside can use our implementation if we don't want to. Even with reflection, that's impossible. So then we can have something like this. We can have a package sales UI, sales domain, sales infrastructure. That's a 3-tier architecture, if you like to. Typical. So if we do this in Java before 9, then of course we wouldn't have a bounded context because everything is would have to be public to use it from the outside. Yeah, that's a problem. If you want to do this with packages, you cannot have both. You can use packages either to do the domain separation with bounded context, or for the layers, but not both. Yeah, I would say it's a good thing to put this into a module. So we have, I step one further. We have a module like this. The upper thing is the implementation of the modules, the 3 layers. And then we also have an API. And this together is a module which is a bounded context. So we have a domain architecture in the big picture, we have several bounded contexts, and in the bounded context, we can have a technical architecture that's also expressed in the code with the packages. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Okay. Okay, let's do that. Okay. What we can have now is implementation and interface of something bigger than a class separated. So this is a module. And what we have to do now is use this module descriptor to define our module. So we can define a module that's called sales, the name of our bounded context. And we say we export this package, leasing hero sales.api. And by using this exports keyword, we tell the compiler, this is the interface to this module. And then we get something like this. We have a module, and there's an interface up there, and there's everything else inside, and nobody from the outside knows what's inside, and nobody has to care about. That's what we want to have. And on the other side, on the use side, we also have to define a module. So we would also define a module risk management. And since the risk management requires the sales, we would express this like this. So we would use the keyword requires and then use the module we're requiring. This feels a bit strange. At the start, this is a module after requires, and this is a package after exports. Feels a bit strange at first, but it's a good idea in the end. Okay, then we have something like this. We have a sales bounded context, which is in a module, sales, and we have a risk management context, which is another module, risk management, and the risk management module uses the sales module. Okay. Yeah, then there's of course a rule that usually we would use reverse domain names, so something like this, like de.wps.leasinghero.sales, but it was too long to put it on all the slides, so that's why I didn't do it. Yeah, what we got then is our so-called modular jars. That's what the JDK makes of this. And every bounded context is then a modular jar. Okay, maybe a thing that's even more interesting for the interface we want to have between bounded contexts is this mechanism with uses provides. We've seen exports and requires, that we have a direct connection between two modules. And with uses provides, we can say, now we're not talking about the other module we're using, but we can say, I need these services. And another module can say, I provide these services. And then you can exchange the modules that provide the services. Maybe that's better for what we're doing here for the loose coupling we want to have. So you can look into that. Okay. Then we want to integrate our bounded contexts with each other. How do we do that? One thing we see from DDD is the so-called open host service. That we say one context, the sales context, provides a service, a contract service, and maybe that one has a method read signed contracts, so that we can call from the risk management this service and then get the contracts that were signed. Another possibility is events. When we want to do it asynchronously. So that we can say the sales publishes an event, contract signed, and the risk management subscribes to this event. And if you ask me, I think in this case, this event is better because it describes better what's happening in the domain. When you look at that sales department and the risk management department, what they are doing, they are working asynchronously. So the sales department, they are going out to the customers and get contract signed, and then they put it into the inbox in the risk management, and sometime later, well, the sales really doesn't care about when it's done, then the risk management makes its vote. So the different bounded contexts can work independently from each other, as long as the other bounded context will be there again sometime. In the end, of course, we want to have the contract voted and in sales as well. Okay. This somehow relates with team organization. So when talking about microservices or DDD, you always have to cite Conway's law. Of course, I will do this as well. And what we can do when we have different bounded contexts is that we can put a different team on a different bounded context. That's a good thing. So, and what is Conway's law? You can read it here. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs. You can see it's from a scientific paper, the first formulation. But the important point is this, that the organization of the software and the organization of the team or the teams that are working on the software will be the same or will be congruent. The architecture and the team organization will be basically the same. Another quote from Eric Raymond: if you have 4 groups working on a compiler, you get a 4-pass compiler. And we can use that in what we're doing here. If we see our architecture that we are wishing for are these bounded contexts, then we can do a so-called reverse Conway's maneuver. We can say, okay, let's build a team sales and let's build a team risk management, and they should develop their own piece of software. And since there are different teams, Conway's law is working for us. There will be a lot of communication in this team and in that team, but not as much communication between the teams. That's just natural. And in this case, we want that because we want to have high cohesion in the bounded context, but low coupling to other bounded contexts. And of course, we can do that with microservices very well. What are microservices? The microservices architecture is something different than the monolith. The monolith, that's what we see here at the left, the so-called deployment monolith. So we have one big program that can only be deployed as a whole. Every smallest part we're changing leads to a new release for the whole system. And microservices means we have different deployment units. The question is, okay, what do we take for different deployment units? And if you ask me, a good idea is to take bounded context, to take something from the domain, where you can see these things can work in the domain independently from each other. Then they can work independently each other in the technology as well, in the software as well. And of course, when you have different deployment units, then you also come into a bit of trouble because that's a distributed system and you have to have a network and they have to communicate with each other. And so it's not too easy to have this. But of course, you get a lot of freedom. So every team gets its own bounded context, gets its own deployment unit, that is microservice. So every team can do what it wants to. So they all can have the same architecture, but we can also say every microservice, every bounded context, every team has its own architecture because the team decides what they're doing inside, which database they are using, if they're using a database, or which programming language they want to use. Because the interface here is something IP-based. Okay, when we do that, and we look back into our herd of cows, then we can see every of these cows is a bounded context, is a microservice, and every of these cows, every of these microservices can live on its own, at least for a time. So that's good, because that means we don't have to deploy everything as a whole, but every bounded context, every team can say, we want to release a new version, and as long as we don't break the interface, we can release a new version as often as we would like to. So Team Emma may go down, implement a new version and release it. And that would be no problem. And again, to have this, it's important to look first into your domain. Can you do the same in the domain? And yeah, when we look at this, as we saw earlier, sales and risk management, they can work asynchronously, independently from each other. Sales, they're a sales department. When do they work? Well, sales almost works never, but only when the customer's there. On Saturday, on Sunday, when this customer's there, sales is working. And the risk management, they are working 9 to 5, except on Friday. And on 1 they say, let's start the weekend. And that's no problem. We have this different kinds of work because we have an asynchronous connection between them. We have this contract that is thrown into the inbox or taken out of the inbox. That's no problem. And the same is true for the systems that we can build for this leasing organization. When we have a bounded context sales and a bounded context risk management, or even further, when we have a microservice sales and the microservice risk management, we can develop them with different teams and we can run them with different teams. So DevOps is of course another topic that's interesting for this. And we can have different release cycles and different product owners, all this stuff, as long as we look at stable interfaces. So we can do something like this. We say the sales team will release a new version on a weekend, on some time when the sales isn't working. So we can put even on a weekday, then it wouldn't be a problem for the risk management. The risk management can work, even if this takes quite some time. And if we then come back with a sales microservice in a new version again. So that is what you want to do with microservices in the most cases. If you're not Netflix or not Spotify. If you're Netflix or Spotify, then you have other reasons to do it because you want to scale and other things are interesting. But if you're working at most projects, microservices are interesting, especially for this kind of stuff. Okay, so we have seen the enemy of microservices is the monolith. And yeah, as some of you might know, when you look at monolith and computers, we know from film history that's a bad idea because this is what's going to be happen. Please open the pod bay door, hell, you all know from Odyssey. And answers, I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that. That's not what we want to have. So think about if you want to still have a monolith. But when moving from a monolith or monolithic architecture to a microservice architecture, you have to think about a lot of things. Yo, thank you. And one I stole from Simon Brown, this slide. And the idea is pretty good. Where we all are starting is down here at the monolithic big ball of mud. Monolithic means we have one deployment unit, and big ball of mud means everything is connected to everything, so we don't have a strategic design with bounded context. And we have this whack-a-mole issues, and the teams cannot work independently, and everybody hates it. And then you go to the internet or you go to a conference like this, and people tell you what you need is microservices. And then you say, yeah, what's microservices? Microservices is we need more than one deployment unit. Okay, let's do this. Let's build more than one deployment unit. And what we have then is this. We go from there to this, to a distributed big ball of mud. Because we still have a big ball of mud, no strategic design that's domain-driven. Plus, we have several deployment units which have to communicate over a network, which is a distributed system. So this, what you get is the worst of all. It's a combination of the negative things. So what's good for us consultants is a lot of companies are doing this, and when they hear they're calling us and say, help, what can we do? But I would recommend don't go this way, better go this way. Start with a monolithic big ball of mud and think about your domain first and see that you can draw context boundaries to get modules inside of your monolith with packages, with modules, whatever. And from there you can say, okay, now I take one or two of these modules I have, of these bounded contexts I have, and then make them their own deployment units, make them microservices. Okay, here I have to look again at the time, and I would say I have to skip this. Oh my God, sorry. Using PowerPoint on a Mac. Okay, and coming to an end, I like to recommend some further reading because 45 minutes is short. Yeah, of course, as I said, when you want to look at the slides again, you can find them on SpeakerDeck, and there's a video that will be, I think, published on the JDK IO website after the conference. And when you want to look at the Java Modules system deeper, this is a book from Nikolai Parlok, which is interesting about that. When you're interested in DDD, this is the Bible by Eric Elvis himself, the big blue book, Tackling Complexity in the Heart of Software. The problem is, beside that it's old now, it's quite thick and not an easy read. So if you're impatient, maybe you want to look at Domain-Driven Design Distilled by Vaughan Vernon. It's only 120 pages. And when you understand German, I would recommend especially the German version of it. It's even better than the English original. That's because I made the translation. Okay. There you were supposed to laugh again. Sorry. Okay, no, read it in English if you understand it. Yeah, and if you want to look at domain storytelling, there's a website, domainstorytelling.org. And as my colleague Stefan tweeted earlier, there's a book written about it. Yeah, please ask us frequently for a release date. Okay, and interesting for this book is, of course, telling us your story. If you try the method, tell us about it, but tell us your domain story as well. Yeah, I have Swag with me. And if you say, wow, 45 minutes for DDD, that's a lot of stuff in a short time. I want to look more deeply into it, then come to one of my workshops I'm giving 3 days. You can book me for that. Or, of course, I have flyers with me. As I said, I work as a consultant that way. And doing some advertisement. Now comes the important point. The end is near. Yeah, but where's the important advertisement? Oh my God. I wanted to tell you also doing something good. And that is make a blood donation. Okay, yeah. And now the end is near. Okay, good. Yeah, I would be happy about feedback. As you might have noticed, there are these things over there. Please give me feedback by pressing the buttons, and of course, it's best when you press the green one. And that's it. I'm at the end. Thank you. Yeah, do my applaud now.